In 1954, Betty Crocker told American housewives to serve meatloaf topped with canned peach halves and call it elegant. Today, food critics call it a crime against dinner. But here is the twist. Food historians are finding that those strange 1950s recipes actually solve problems modern cooks forgot exist. Number 12 on this list was once featured in Life magazine as the future of American dessert. And number 3 uses a chemical reaction most home cooks could not replicate today if they tried. These 25 forgotten foods were so common in post-war America that entire cookbook empires were built on them. Then they vanished. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because what you are about to see might bring back a dinner your grandmother made every Thursday. Let's count down the 25 forgotten foods every American mom made in the 1950s. Number 25, tomato aspic. The jiggling ruby ring of tomato aspic anchored every bridge club luncheon from Des Moines to Dallas. Your mother softened Knox gelatin in cold water, then stirred it into hot tomato juice spiked with Worcestershire, lemon, and a shake of celery salt. She poured the whole lot into a copper ring mold, tucked it into the Frigidaire overnight, and unmolded it onto a bed of iceberg lettuce come Saturday noon. Betty Crocker's picture cookbook of 1950 called it the perfect hostess salad. A can of tomato juice cost 15 cents. An envelope of gelatin cost a nickel. For less than a quarter, your mother produced a centerpiece. The aspic trembled when the table was bumped, catching the afternoon light through the picture window. Guests cooed over it. Nobody under 40 makes aspic anymore. The mold is in the attic with the fondue set, waiting for a revival that may never come. Number 24, liver and onions. Thursday was liver night in half the kitchens in America. Your mother brought home a pound of beef liver from the butcher for about 35 cents, patted it dry, dredged it in seasoned flour, and slid it into a cast iron skillet slicked with bacon grease. Alongside 2 yellow onions softened into sweet gold. She knew the rule her own mother had drilled into her. Overcook liver and it turns to shoe leather. A minute aside, no more. Served with mashed potatoes and a pool of pan gravy, it was the cheapest way to get iron into growing kids during a decade when doctors still talked about tired blood. The 1955 Joy of Cooking devoted 3 pages to liver preparation. Today it appears in maybe 1 in 50 American homes. We swapped the iron-rich liver for supplement pills and called that progress. Number 23, creamed chipped beef on toast. Veterans called it SOS, and their wives rechristened it cream chipped beef, and for a generation of GI families, it was a Saturday morning ritual. Your mother bought a small jar of armor-dried beef for about 29 cents, rinsed the salt off the paper-thin slices, and stirred them into a simple white sauce thickened with flour and butter. Spooned over toasted Wonder Bread, it was breakfast, lunch, or emergency dinner when the grocery budget had collapsed 3 days before payday. The dish stretched a tiny jar of beef to feed 4. The jar itself became a drinking glass once emptied, sitting in cupboards for decades afterward. You can still buy those jars if you hunt for them. Hormel sells them, but hardly anyone under 60 knows what to do with one. The shingle is gone. Number 22, Prune Whip. Prune Whip was the diet dessert before diet desserts existed. Your mother simmered prunes until soft, mashed them with sugar and a squeeze of lemon, then folded the puree into stiffly beaten egg whites until the mixture tripled in volume and turned a pretty mauve. Baked for 20 minutes, it emerged puffed like a soufflé, trembling when the oven door shut. Served with a drizzle of cold custard, it seemed light as a cloud despite the humble fruit underneath. The 1953 Good Housekeeping Cookbook recommended it to any mother whose husband watched his waistline. A box of prunes cost 19 cents and lasted 3 weeks. Prune Whip won blue ribbons at county fairs, from Iowa to upstate New York. Now, prunes themselves have been rebranded as dried plums, and even the new name has not saved them. The whip is a ghost. Number 21st, salmon croquettes. Friday night in a Catholic household meant fish, and fish most often meant salmon croquettes. Your mother opened a can of pink salmon for about 30 cents, picked out the soft bones and silver skin, then mashed the flesh with crushed saltines, a beaten egg, and a handful of minced onion. Shaped into patties and fried golden in a cast-iron skillet, they had a crisp crust and a tender, briny middle. Served with boiled peas and a wedge of lemon, they turned a pantry staple into Friday supper for under $1. Every parish cookbook of the era carried 3 versions, each woman swearing her own was the best. Today, bagged salmon portions from the freezer case have replaced the can, and fewer families observe Friday abstinence. The croquette, once as common as the can opener, vanished with the ritual that created it. Number 20, mock apple pie. First pattern break. Here is where things get strange. Nothing reveals post-war American ingenuity quite like a pie with no apples in it. The recipe printed on every box of Ritz crackers in the 1950s called for 36 crackers, 1 1/4 cups of sugar, cream of tartar, and lemon juice simmered into a thin, spiced syrup. The crackers soaked up the liquid and softened into something uncannily close to stewed apples. Baked between 2 crusts with a crisscross of butter on top, it genuinely fooled guests. The recipe originated during the Depression when apples were scarce, but it stayed in rotation through the 1950s because it worked and the ingredients were kept in the pantry. By 1970, apples had become cheap year-round thanks to cold storage and interstate trucking, and the mock pie slipped from use. Nabisco still prints the recipe on the box. Almost nobody reads it anymore. Number 19, Jellied chicken south salad. Another Jell-O-based marvel from a decade that could not leave well enough alone. Your mother dissolved a packet of lemon gelatin in boiling water, stirred in a half cup of mayonnaise, then folded in shredded poached chicken, diced celery, chopped hard-boiled eggs, and slivered almonds. Poured into a ring mold and chilled until firm, the whole thing unmolded onto a platter like a savory crown. Ladies' luncheons in the suburbs of the late 1950s served almost nothing else. The packet of Jell-O cost 7 cents. A whole chicken from the A and P cost $1.50. For under $2, a hostess fed 8 women in full view of the picture window. When women returned to the workforce in the 70s, the 3-hour luncheon died, and the jellied chicken salad went with it, never to return. Number 18, ham loaf with pineapple. Ham loaf was meatloaf's fancier cousin, served when the pastor came to Sunday supper. Your mother ground leftover Easter ham through the hand grinder clamped to the edge of the kitchen table, mixed it with ground pork, cracker crumbs, milk, and a beaten egg, then pressed the whole thing into a loaf pan. On top went canned pineapple rings, each one centered with a maraschino cherry and held in place with a whole clove. It baked for an hour and was basted with a brown sugar and vinegar glaze until it emerged glossy and sweet, sliced like a proper roast. A ham loaf stretched $2 worth of leftovers into supper for $6. Nothing went to waste. Hams no longer come with the bone that once made ham loaf necessary, and ready sliced deli ham simply will not grind. The loaf disappeared with the cut. Number 17, Welsh rarebit. The name confused American kids for decades because there was no rabbit involved. Your mother melted sharp cheddar in a pan with butter, dry mustard, Worcestershire sauce, and a splash of beer or evaporated milk, stirring until it became a smooth, glossy sauce. Poured over toast points and slid under the broiler for 30 seconds. The top bubbled and browned. A dish of tomato slices alongside completed supper. Welsh rarebit was the quick weeknight answer for 40 cents and 15 minutes. It appeared in Fanny Farmer and in the Settlement Cookbook and in every church fundraiser cookbook printed before 1965. When processed cheese slices took over in the 60s and nobody kept real cheddar on hand, the rarebit faded. A grilled cheese sandwich is its descendant. Few realize the sauce itself was once the entire meal. Number 16, porcupine meatballs. The name came from the rice that poked out of every meatball like quills. Your mother mixed ground beef with raw, long-grain rice, a grated onion, salt, and pepper, rolled the mixture into balls the size of golf balls, and arranged them in a casserole dish. She poured a can of Campbell's tomato soup, thinned with water, over the top, covered the dish with foil, and baked it for an hour. The rice swelled and cooked inside the meatballs themselves, and each one emerged with sharp white grains sticking out in all directions. Kids loved the novelty. A pound of ground beef cost 55 cents, a cup of rice a nickel, and a can of tomato soup 10 cents. The whole dish fed a family of 5 for under 70 cents. Slow cookers and rice cookers separated these ingredients forever, and the porcupine retreated into nostalgia. Number 15, tuna noodle casserole with potato chip topping. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. If any dish defined mid-century American supper time, this was it. Your mother cooked a bag of egg noodles, drained them, then stirred in a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, a can of tuna, drained of its oil, a cup of frozen peas, and a splash of milk. She poured the mixture into a Pyrex dish, covered the top with generously crushed potato chips, and baked for 30 minutes. The chips turned deep gold, salty and crisp, while the casserole bubbled underneath. A box of noodles cost 23 cents, a can of tuna 30 cents, the soup a dime. Supper for 6 appeared on the table for well under $1. Here is what Campbell's never tells you. They hired consumer researchers in 1955 to figure out why the casserole was their top-selling soup recipe. The answer was the chip topping. That salty, crunchy contrast against the creamy interior activated something no other casserole did. Tuna noodle is still made, but rarely with the potato chip topping, which was the entire point. Something essential has been lost to breadcrumbs. Number 14, Ambrosia salad. In the American South, ambrosia was not a salad at all, but a dessert in disguise. Your mother drained a can of mandarin oranges, a can of crushed pineapple, and a jar of maraschino cherries, then folded the fruits together with shredded sweetened coconut, miniature marshmallows, and before Cool Whip existed, whipped carnation, evaporated milk. The whole pink and orange cloud chilled overnight, giving the marshmallows time to soften into pillowy sweetness. Served in cut glass bowls at Thanksgiving, it held the place of honor beside the turkey. Every Southern church potluck expected at least 3 versions on the table. Today's home cooks find it too sweet, too processed, too pink for modern tastes. The marshmallows have faded from the table, and with them went the dish that once called itself the food of the gods. Number 13, chicken a la king. When your mother needed to feed unexpected company, she made chicken a la king. A package of frozen patty shells from the freezer case warmed in the oven, while the filling came together on the stove. She cooked chopped chicken in a rich cream sauce studded with canned mushrooms, diced pimentos, and green peas, then spooned the pale yellow mixture into each crisp shell. The red pimento flecks against the golden sauce looked deliberately festive on the plate. Chicken a la king was the dish that signaled a hostess took herself seriously. It appeared on Lutheran church suppers, bridge night menus, and on the printed place cards of luncheons. The frozen patty shell, a Pepperidge Farm invention, was the infrastructure that made the dish possible. When patty shells disappeared from most freezer cases in the 80s, chicken a la king had nowhere to live. The dish outlived its vessel by only a few years. If you want the full collection, I made a cookbook with 100 simple meals just like these. Link below. Number 12. Baked Alaska. Few desserts announced special occasion more loudly than Baked Alaska. Your mother layered a round of pound cake on a sheet pan, mounded it with slightly softened vanilla ice cream, and froze the whole tower solid for an hour. Minutes before serving, she whipped up a stiff meringue, swirled it over the ice cream mountain, sealing every inch, and slid the assembly into a very hot oven for 3 minutes flat. The meringue browned in peaks, while the ice cream underneath stayed frozen, protected by the insulating foam of the egg whites. When she carried it to the table, guests literally gasped. The 1959 Better Homes and Gardens magazine called it America's most impressive dessert. It required theater, timing, and nerves. Modern home cooks order tiramisu from the bakery instead. The Baked Alaska, once the high-wire act of Sunday suppers, has left the building almost entirely. Number 11. Chop Suey Casserole. Actual Chinese food would not arrive in most American neighborhoods until the 1970s. What your mother called chop suey was an entirely American invention built around a can of la choy bean sprouts and a can of water chestnuts. She browned ground beef with onions and celery, stirred in the drained canned vegetables, a packet of dry onion soup mix, and a splash of soy sauce, then topped the whole thing with crispy chow mein noodles from the same yellow la choy box. Baked for 20 minutes, the noodles toasted on top. It tasted like nothing eaten in China, but it felt exotic in Toledo in 1956. La choy still exists. The casserole has not survived the arrival of actual Chinese takeout in every strip mall in America. Real dumplings have no interest in a can of bean sprouts, and neither does anyone else. Number 10. Scalloped potatoes and ham. The Sunday ham always had a second life as scalloped potatoes. Your mother sliced russets paper thin with a sharp knife or a mandolin, layered them in a buttered baking dish with flour, salt, pepper, and the diced leftover ham. She poured scalded milk over the top until the potatoes were barely covered, dotted the surface with butter, and baked for 90 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit until the top browned and the bottom turned silky and thick. A 5-pound bag of potatoes cost 49 cents, and the ham was already paid for. The whole casserole bubbled golden and served 8 easily. Today's scalloped potatoes come from a Betty Crocker box with a packet of dehydrated sauce, and the ham is nowhere in sight. The slow-layered supper that turned Sunday's leftovers into a second feast has been replaced by a shortcut that captures none of its patience. Christmas in America in the 1950s was not Christmas without a plate of Divinity. Your mother boiled sugar, corn syrup, and water to the hardball stage, measured with a glass candy thermometer clipped to the pan. She poured the hot syrup in a thin thread into stiffly beaten egg whites while beating continuously with the new electric mixer, then folded in chopped pecans just before the mixture lost its gloss. Dropped by teaspoonfuls onto waxed paper, each piece set up white and fluffy, almost like an edible cloud. Here is what made it magical. It required a dry day. Humidity turned it into a sticky mess, and women planned batches around the weather forecast in the Sunday paper. A pound of sugar cost 10 cents, and a pint of corn syrup cost 25 cents. Divinity is almost impossible to find today outside specialty Christmas catalogs. It was too labor-intensive, too weather-dependent, and too fussy for modern kitchens. Store-bought fudge replaced it. Number 8. Stuffed cabbage rolls. Cabbage rolls carried old country weight into American kitchens of immigrant families from Poland, Hungary, Russia and Ukraine, but by the 1950s, cooks from every background had adopted the recipe. Your mother blanched a head of cabbage until the leaves peeled away tender and pliable. She mixed ground beef with partially cooked rice, grated onion, salt, and pepper, then wrapped each packet in a cabbage leaf, folding tightly at the ends. The rolls nested in a Dutch oven over a bed of tomato sauce spiked with a little brown sugar and lemon juice, covered and simmered for 2 hours. The whole kitchen filled with a sweet-sour aroma that announced supper before plates hit the table. A head of cabbage cost a dime. A pound of ground beef cost 50 cents. Most American home cooks today find the assembly tedious. Supermarket freezers sell frozen versions now. Nobody rolls their own anymore. Number 7. Icebox cake. Third pattern break. Before home freezers were common, every refrigerator had a small icebox compartment at the top, and that name stuck to an entire category of no-bake desserts. Your mother whipped a pint of heavy cream with sugar and vanilla until stiff, then layered it between Nabisco famous chocolate wafers in a loaf pan. 6 hours in the refrigerator transformed the hard cookies into a soft chocolate cake that sliced beautifully into striped pieces. The cream softened the wafers. The wafers flavored the cream, and no oven was required. Every summer, church picnic had at least 2 versions on the dessert table. Here's the tragedy. The Nabisco famous wafer, originally designed for this exact recipe, was discontinued by Nabisco in 2023, and with it went the original icebox cake. Substitutes exist now, and home bakers share workarounds online. None of them quite replicate the wafer's particular bite, and the dessert that once lived in every American refrigerator is now mostly a memory kept alive by people who remember what it tasted like done right. Number 6. Tamale pie was America's compromise with Mexican food, Midwestern style. Your mother browned ground beef with onions, stirred in a can of diced tomatoes, a can of corn, a can of sliced black olives, and a tablespoon of chili powder. Into a casserole dish it went, topped with a thick cornmeal batter made from yellow cornmeal, milk, and a beaten egg. The cornmeal baked into a golden cap, while the chili-scented filling bubbled underneath it. A 1952 Ladies' Home Journal called it the most exciting family supper of the year. Every church cookbook had 3 versions. When real Mexican restaurants opened in most American cities in the 1970s and the 1980s, tamale pie seemed apologetic by comparison. It vanished almost overnight from weeknight dinner rotations. In small towns, it still appears occasionally at potlucks, a relic of the era before proper enchiladas crossed the county line. Number 5. Swiss steak. Swiss steak had nothing to do with Switzerland. The Swissing technique was a brilliant one. It involved pounding flour into a cheap cut of round steak with the edge of a dinner plate or a serrated meat mallet, working the flour into the fibers until the meat held together during long braising. Your mother browned the floured steak in bacon drippings, then simmered it for 2 hours in a sauce of canned tomatoes, onions, green pepper, celery, and a bay leaf. Here is the chemistry. The pounded-in flour not only tenderized the meat by breaking down connective tissue, it thickened the braising liquid from the inside out, creating a gravy without a separate roux. Food scientists at Cooks Illustrated tested the technique in 2011 and confirmed it produced more tender results than modern sous vide on the same cut. A pound of round steak cost 69 cents in 1956. Swiss steak fed 6, left enough gravy for the next night's mashed potatoes, and took 10 minutes of actual work once the simmering began. The arrival of cheap tender cuts like sirloin killed it. Nobody Swisses steak anymore. Number 4, beef tongue. Your mother bought a whole beef tongue from the butcher for about 30 cents a pound. It looked unsettling in the shopping bag, no question. Boiled for 3 hours with bay leaf, peppercorns, and quartered onions, the rough outer skin was peeled away to reveal tender, pink meat underneath. Sliced thin, it went into sandwiches on rye bread with brown mustard and a slice of raw onion. Served hot with horseradish sauce, it was Sunday dinner. Jewish delis in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles kept tongue sandwiches on the menu through the 1960s, and home cooks of every background bought the whole tongue because it fed a family for 3 days. The sight of a tongue on a cutting board became culturally unacceptable sometime in the 1970s. Supermarket meat counters stopped carrying it. Today, a whole beef tongue is a specialty order, and the sandwich that sustained lunch counters from Brooklyn to Boyle Heights has all but disappeared. Number 3, tomato soup cake. The recipe sounded like a joke when grandmothers pulled it out, but tomato soup cake was a legitimate Depression-era trick that carried straight into the 1950s. Your mother stirred a can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup into a batter with flour, sugar, baking soda, cinnamon, cloves, and raisins. No eggs, no milk. The tomato soup provided the moisture, the acid to activate the baking soda, and a mysterious depth that made the cake taste faintly of spiced apple. Frosted with cream cheese icing, nobody could guess the secret ingredient. Campbell's printed the recipe on the can label for decades. Food scientists confirmed the chemistry in recent years. The soup's acid creates a lift and tenderness standard water simply cannot match, and the tomato solids add a savory richness that reads as spice rather than vegetable on the palate. The cake disappeared when boxed cake mixes took over the dessert aisle, but the original still tastes better than Duncan Hines. Almost nobody knows. Number 2, Spam loaf. Spam was not a punchline in 1954. It was supper. Your mother unmolded a can of Spam, scored the top in a diamond pattern, stuck a whole clove in each diamond, and glazed the whole thing with brown sugar and yellow mustard. Baked for 45 minutes. The surface caramelized into a sweet crust over the salty interior. Sliced like a miniature ham, it served 4 with scalloped potatoes and a canned vegetable. A can of Spam cost 39 cents, and the entire dinner came in under $1. Hormel sold millions of cans a year during the 1950s, and Spam loaf appeared on American tables from Oahu to Maine. The joke about Spam started sometime in the 1970s, and by the 1980s, serving it had become quietly shameful. Except in Hawaii, where it never stopped for a single day, Spam loaf is gone. The brown sugar glaze took it out in style, and nobody built a replacement. Number 1, Sunday pot roast with all its leftovers. Nothing anchored the American week like Sunday pot roast. Your mother bought a chuck roast for 89 cents a pound, seared it on all sides in the heavy Dutch oven, then buried it in carrots, potatoes, onions, and celery with a cup of beef broth and a splash of Worcestershire. 3 hours at 325 degrees Fahrenheit, and the house smelled like home from noon onward. But the roast was only the beginning. Monday's leftovers became hash, chopped fine with potatoes and onions, and fried crisp for breakfast. Tuesday was hot roast beef sandwiches on white bread with gravy ladled over the top. Wednesday, the last of the meat went into vegetable soup with the bone. 4 dinners from one roast. The ritual died when families stopped eating together on Sunday, when microwaves made every meal an individual event, and when the concept of planned leftovers started to feel poor rather than wise. Pot roast still appears occasionally on American tables. The week-long ritual around it has vanished, and with it went the rhythm of an entire American domestic life. That's the list. 25 foods that once defined American kitchens and now live only in cookbooks and memory. Try one this week. Just one. The icebox cake, the Swiss steak, the tomato soup cake, the Sunday pot roast with Monday's hash. Then come back and tell me if your grandmother was just being sentimental or if she actually knew something worth keeping. If you want the full collection, I made a cookbook with 100 simple meals just like these. Link below. Drop a comment telling me which one your grandmother made. Because these were not just dinners. They were the way an entire generation took care of each other. Your grandmother knew. Now you know too.